Evanston. But as I pointed out, the seeds were planted a lot earlier, and I hope that you don't mind. I know we're going to talk about the different things that I've learned, but I want to give you a little bit more texture of where I was coming from. So growing up, my family lived in Victory Park, which was a quiet, well-heeled Johannesburg suburb with green front yards, lazy blue swimming pools, and live-in black maids. There were 22 million black people in South Africa and 6 million whites. Africans were ubiquitous and intimately a part of my young life and utterly apart from it. Though we saw them, they were also invisible. Everyone I knew had a maid. They were bound by strict laws. They required a pass signed by the employer if they were out on the streets. They were frequently picked up for various infractions by roving police vans we called Black Mariahs, which I'd see rolling by as I splashed in our pool. I felt sad for them and helpless and very guilty, but life wasn't fair. I knew it was wrong, but there was nothing that I could do. So I went back to my homework and I played with my friends, had my tea. Our maids knew our families and friends, our language, our customs. They knew the insides of our closets, the corners of our couches, the color of our underwear. And though we loved them, we knew so little about them. We didn't think to ask. Our maid Francina's room, which was a no-frills concrete square, was separated from our house by law by a small concrete backyard. As much time as she spent in our house, her room for us was a world away. By law, a servant's spouse, partner, or children could not live with them. So Francina left her children in her village a few hours away. And at Christmas, she would go back to a place called Evanston. To us, it could have been Pluto. We had no idea what her house looked like at all. We never asked. I never tried to even imagine it. We never visited it. It wasn't something to consider. So the Black Township of Soweto lies just 20 miles from Johannesburg, but like Francina's room and Evanston, to me, it was a faraway place, another dimension. All I knew was that it was black and poor. I read in our government-controlled newspaper that it was dangerous. Grumpy green buses crammed with workers from Soweto would unload in Johannesburg every day. My parents had a painting I loved of a Soweto street scene by an artist named Ingatani, hanging in our living room. And all I knew about Soweto, I knew from the confines of my house and my world. And then around 1975, when I was about 11, somehow my class was taken on a field trip to Soweto to visit a school there. And we went by bus. I remember being stunned at how quickly we arrived at the township border, how close it was. I smushed my nose against the bus window as we bumped along, and the Ingatani painting became alive before my eyes. Paved roads edged with jagged corrugated iron shacks, red dirt roads lined with little brick houses, dusty boys chasing a tire. And at school, we were swarmed by excited students who grabbed us in and pulled us to play. It was the first time I'd seen South Africans, Black South Africans, where they lived or where they were forced to live. And it was just one day. As the sun set, we boarded the bus. We rode the so many miles and such short distance back home to Victory Park. The Soweto riots happened just a year later and helped speed up the end of apartheid. And 2 years after that, as I've said, at age 14, we came to Chicago. So 2015, it's 40 years later, and Obama is our president, and I'm 8,600 miles away from Johannesburg. I'm on another bus, this time with Leadership Evanston, a program of the Evanston Community Foundation. We're learning about the history of Evanston, and we're driving through the streets of Evanston's Black Fifth Ward, learning about the families who live there, some of them going back 6 generations. I'd lived in Evanston for 20 years. My husband and I, like so many liberal white folks, chose Evanston because it was diverse. And it's near Chicago and near the lake. As self-satisfied as we are with our choice, we've only ever had white neighbors, lived on white blocks, shopped in white areas. Black Evanston is totally out of reach to me. I don't even really think about it. I know it's there, but I've never really taken the time to consider why in its diversity, our city is so segregated and how African Americans even got here, or what redlining was. If I'm honest, most of what I know or have ever paid attention to about the Fifth Ward is reports of arrests of gun violence I read about in local newspapers. I know there are many low-income families living there. I've never shopped there, and in fact, there aren't very many shops in the Fifth Ward, which of course I didn't know why at the time, or visited anyone there. Church and Dodge, which is the center, the intersection of the center of the 5th Ward, is a 5-minute car ride from our shiny white 6th Ward, but it is a world away. I stare out the window and I remember the other bus ride to Soweto so long ago. I realize with incredulity that though I consider myself a well-meaning, open person, I've never really lived in Evanston. I don't know it at all. Its duality, its disparity, how divided it is, how few Black people I really know. I never really lived in South Africa, and I've never really lived in America. And I know so many people just as ignorant as I am. And suddenly this time I knew that I had to close the distance. So in the meantime, our Leadership Evanston cohort was reading Just Mercy. And in it, human rights attorney Brian Stevenson talks about his work with defending death row inmates, mostly Black and mostly poor, and describing the racism that is rife in the justice system. He talks about how slavery never really ended, but just evolved. And his book becomes, pardon my expression, my Bible. If you want to work towards racial justice, Brian Stevenson says, there are 4 steps to take. First, get proximate. You can't solve problems or make assessments from a distance. You need to understand the nuances and the details. 2, you have to get uncomfortable. We are all broken, and in brokenness, we understand something about compassion. To truly fight for justice, we must be prepared for an uncomfortable journey. 3, we have to change the narrative. We must begin to talk about the ills of the past and their connection to today. Truth and reconciliation as a nation are all needed before we can begin to change the American narrative on race. And I'll, localize that to say Evanston. And number 4 is to embrace hope. Despite the myriad headlines of growing inequality and racial tensions, Stevenson cautions against reacting with despair and instead to protect our hope quotient. So I am wide awake. Stevenson's steps feel like they were actually written for me. And I want to get uncomfortable. I want to get closer to a community I don't know, have never truly known, talk and share experiences, help change the narrative for myself, for others, and to contribute to building a bridge between our separate realities. Part of our program was a group project focusing on specific Evanston issue. Our group was assigned the broad topic, safety and violence in Evanston. So we decided to create a social media platform on youth gun violence, for which I was so grateful given my connection to the young men at Kurtz. And I volunteered to start a Facebook page, and one of the other group members came up with this name, Dear Evanston, which was just a really fantastic name. We wanted to interview mostly Black Evanston residents and leaders about their experiences with and knowledge and opinions about this ongoing crisis, because in Chicago and in Evanston, youth gun violence is predominantly an issue in this demographic. One person introduced me to the next, and within several weeks and months and then years, within months, I started looking at Evanston and America through completely different eyes. And though our program ended, I wasn't ready to stop because I was learning so much and waking up to myself and to history and the present. And most of all, the amazing realization about how much history is the present. And I was learning to see and live and act with intention and to lead with an eye toward amplifying Black voices so white Evanstonians would pay attention. And it's a sad fact that I think is starting to change, but white people are much more willing to listen to and believe information that they get from other white people, even if it's about Black people. I'm sure it's sort of similar to how we as Jews can argue about anything Jewish and about Israel, but if somebody who isn't Jewish says something similar, it's hard for us to hear. And so, I wanted to raise awareness, the same awareness I was getting about the Black community and about equity and inclusion, which were new words to me, even though I'd worked at the ADL. White people in Evanston are proximate to wealth and to privilege and power. And so it's incumbent on us to recognize that and to understand that we can leverage it toward equity. So I have a short video that I was going to show you, if that's okay, and then come back to the is it all right? Okay, so I think How do I do it? I share screen. I've never done this before. Does anybody know?
Share your screen, and then at the top, there's something you have to click on to also share the audio. If someone else has good advice, chime in.
It's at the bottom left corner.
Yeah, and
Share sound.
optimize for video, and then share. And will I be able to see the video?
Yes. When you put it up, just make sure you click that checkbox that says share sound.
Okay.
Computer sound.
And then do I start the video first or share my screen first?
Share your screen first.
Got it. All right. Now, do you see it? Do you see
We see your desktop.
Okay. And now do you see a video?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, my mother's people, who are the Logan side of me, are from Carolina, South Carolina, Abbeville, South Carolina. My father's side of me, the Jacksons, are from Ware, Mississippi. I am definitely a byproduct of Black Evanston. I knew that there were boundaries in Evanston, just like there were boundaries in South Africa, and I knew where I belonged. You just knew that there's limitations on what you can and cannot do.
Did you tell me that your mom was an alcoholic?
My mother was an alcoholic, yes. My mother was depressed about her condition. She went downstairs and she set the house on fire. They killed her. I really believe this. I think I'm about to be 18. And she went upstairs to try to get out the house and ended up turning and going into a closet and dying from smoking.
So she didn't intend to kill herself?
No.
Where were you?
I went to a party. I come back, I look down the street, there's nothing but fire trucks. And my mother was my best friend. It probably was the greatest single amount of emotional pain I've ever felt in my entire life. I also became very angry after that. Then I started to get high too. Me trying to medicate myself from the pain.
This exhibit is about a family story. My father got into an altercation where he worked, and Dad didn't suffer fools, and he didn't take a lot of stuff. And the shop boss said, I ought to take a pipe and bust you upside the head with it. He didn't realize that Papa already had a pipe. That was a start, and that was a critical thing that led us to have to leave the South. For a long time, I didn't realize that we were part of something much bigger. You know, this was a part of this big migration that took place. This is art that tells his family story. James and Ruth, my people, their story, our story. My dad always said, if you don't have a past worth mentioning, it's possible that you might not have a future worth defending.
Okay, I'm looking at my documentation of my father's life. And when I went to the Memorial Gardens and saw the structures and that were hanging down, and they named the county and the state, and they had inscribed people who have been hung in that county and in that state. I saw my father's county, which was Richmond County in Augusta, Georgia. I never thought about it before. If they had not, you know, hit him under his grandmother's porch and got him out of town, his name might have been up there. Now, this is what my father told me. He said as they were playing a game of marbles, and when the game was over, my father had won the marbles. And so his neighbor friend wanted his marbles back. And so my dad refused to give them back to me. He said, no, I won these fair and square. You know?
And he was a white guy, a white child.
He was a white neighbor. And so he punched the guy in the nose. And later on, the neighbor's father came back with the sheriff. My grandmother was quite upset because she knew what might happen to him. They saw the sheriff coming and hid him under the porch of the house. And my uncle was a porter on the railroad. So he rode the train from Chicago to Florida. And his uncle was living in Evanston. So they contacted him, and his uncle met him on the train, and he brought him to Chicago. That's him, I think, in the middle. And this is his uncle that brought him to Evanston. He never went back. And he didn't tell me that story about the altercation until I was grown and had my own family. You know, he felt so racism here, but he loved Evanston. He said he had some drawbacks, but he did not let us know until we were grown. It's like he never played for any sports at the high school because they could not use the dressing rooms. This is a certificate that he played sports for the city of Evanston, but he was never over in the high school. He said he refused to do that. He even played a short time in the baseball Negro League. He did not go to college because he was drafted. Like when he got out of the service, and I say again, he was a very proud man. He thought that he would, because he had all this training in the Navy, he worked on airplanes. He applied at Glenview Air Base, and they would not hire him. And he Camel's store on Central Street hired him, but then he found out that the co-worker was making more money, who was white. He quit. He walked off the job. He drove a cab. Then his last job, he worked for the city as a city inspector. It was very heartbreaking to him, you know, that they looked at him, you know, his color. He instilled in us, you know, you can do whatever, you know, whatever you want. And
So
I lived in the 5th Ward, but that's where all my friends and family were. But I had was one time we were trick-or-treating, and we went across Green Bay Road in North Evanston, and one guy came to the door. He said, "Go on back in your own neighborhood and trick-or-treat." We knew that Black people, you know, couldn't buy property.
How do you think the Black community has changed here in Evanston in the 5th Ward? Because it sounds like it was so tight.
It was. And see, back when the integration came, that's when we kind of went this way. And I worked on some of the committees, you know, for integration. We thought if we brought in the white students, we would get new books, that's what we were trying to do. We took all the burden, you know, we had to take on the burden of doing it. So that was what was bad about it.
But what do you think we should be doing now?
Parents still have to give their Black sons to talk. When you leave the house, you have to act a certain way and this and that. Yeah, there's still some way to go. There's a long way to go.
When I was growing up in this community, in the 5th Ward, we had all of our own stuff. We had a Black hospital, community hospital, where I was born. All my siblings were born. Most of my relatives were born. We had our own schools. We had gas stations. We had restaurants. We had a pharmacy, Doc Morrison's pharmacy. We had little mom and pop grocery stores and corner stores. We had our own stuff. And after integration, all of that gone. It seems like we paid a heavy toll, a very high price.
G. Oh, okay. No, I know how to use these.
That's a good one.
Okay, go.
Tell me why you organized this unity work.
Why is it important to us? So we can have much more community outreach and be able to have access for
5th Ward can have more activities to take part in.
Yeah.
I feel like we need to all stand together as a community in Evanston to support the opportunities that are available for every sector of our community. And as it stands right now, it's inequitable.
I'm South African. I did not participate in South Africa. Now I participate.
So my child's father, his name was Carter Priester. He was murdered September 10th of 2013 in front of his home. He was a motivator. He was a supporter. Like any idea that I came up with and I told him about, he'd be like, "Oh, you know, you can really do that." I guess he felt like because the odds were stacked against him, because of his background, those who didn't have, any challenges or barriers preventing them from success, that they can make it. A black man already has 3 strikes against him. They may feel, whatever, I can't survive no way. But then there's 1,001 positive role models right here.
So I'm at the ETHS Die-In, which is protesting gun violence and remembering ETHS students who have been killed by gun violence.
Today we're honoring 9 past or current students who were shot.
Okay, I am back.
About bringing repair in Evanston. We are talking about the damages that we've learned from Dino Robinson that have happened here in Evanston, and all of my research has been specifically very targeted in Evanston.
How did you come to make such a bold proposition? And did you think you would succeed?
We came to this based on our community goals for equity, inclusion, empowerment in the Black community. And we've done years of equity work and diversity goals. And it was not enough for us to bridge the racial divide, including the racial wealth gap and other disparities that we have in this community. It was my thought that targeted policy response, as radical as the oppression and discrimination, anti-Black racism that got us to this point of disparity would be appropriate, and that would be reparations. We were able to introduce and pass reparations at committee level and later at City Council. I believed it would pass all along because there was a plan, there was the defense, and we had already passed a resolution earlier in that year to end structural racism. We have maintained a goal of equity as a city council. Many organizations in town are partnered in that goal, and we were not moving the needle. And the trajectory showed that we will decrease the racial divide. And in the light of COVID, we've seen that is sure to happen with the devastation in the Black community. So I was confident that we had enough support in the incredible archives from Shorefront Legacy and Dino Robinson's work. I was confident that background that he could provide for us, if we could share a SMART plan that was well documented and defended, that there would be no other appropriate answer but yes to reparations. Anything less than
To those who were in bondage, those who resisted, we honor them by pouring and saying libations. Libations.
All over the world, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Many times I have closed my eyes and became a part of my ancestors' trials and tribulations. Ropes on their necks, chains on their hands, whips on their backs, pain in their souls. Everything spiraling out of control, no one to console them, but the white man to control them. What is our future? A grim...
Well, my mother's...
What we're doing, lift every voice and sing, the Black National Anthem. Lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. May our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. May it resound loud as the rolling seas. Sing a song.
Okay, sorry, I hope that wasn't too long. I have to find my notes again. So I showed you that just to give you an idea of the kinds of things that I've, you know, put myself in front of and learned about, and wanting to bring people along with me. My journey continues to be uplifting, challenging, overwhelming, joyous, devastating, and hopeful. And right now, reparations is my primary focus. I recently on my birthday raised $14,000 for the reparations fund, and I work with Alderman Simmons. I spoke at a panel with her and the national co-chair of reparations to a group in Amherst that were working to pass reparations, and about 2 weeks later we found out that they did. And what I've discovered is that most of all, no matter how much I learn, I'll always have more to learn, and that my small contributions to raising awareness about the Black community and how we can work together to right historic wrongs are nowhere close to what I've received in return. Andrea told you about all the different kinds of things we've done. So I've done, you know, for about 4 years now, I've worked with an Evanston librarian who's African American and Jewish, and we have a book group every other month, a racial justice book group. It started with 10 people, and now we get about 200 people, between 80 and 200 people. And our next one is on Tuesday. We're reading James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own. And, you know, we've done these journeys to Washington, D.C. and to the uncomfortable journey to the South. And we've taken buses to rally against gun violence in Springfield. We did a Fifth Ward festival. And you know, through the book groups, through just getting involved, and as I said, through following my nose, it's how I've learned so much about people. And it was in the learning about the people that I opened my eyes to sort of structural racism and things like that. And there's an author named Ibram X. Kendi who wrote How to Be an Anti-Racist. And he says, you know, you don't worry about people's hearts and minds. We just have to change policies and people will follow. And on the one hand, I think it's true. Like if you make a rule that smoking isn't allowed, then people are just going to have to stop smoking. But I honestly believe that you have to also change hearts and minds at the same time, starting with your own, because that's what helps you see through different lenses. I think probably one of the very first things I did was help my friend Melissa Blunt. Her husband is the last panel you saw in the video is my friend Melissa's husband's work. His name's Ben Blunt. He's a printmaker, and he created a whole lot of Black Lives Matter signs. And so like 5 years ago, before Black Lives Matter signs were a thing, I was running around Evanston, buying them for people, delivering them to people. I wanted every house in Evanston to have a Black Lives Matter sign, because it was all I could think of to do. It was like, you know, just, I needed to do something. And I still believe every house and institution needs a Black Lives Matter sign. I do not think it is enough at all. I think if you put it up because you really believe it, it is a reminder to yourself that you have to do more. And it's a note to the world. It's sort of public awareness and changing public opinion, and it's also showing the Black community that, you know, hopefully your place is a safe place. You know, I'm just trying to go through my notes because I've been talking for a long time. You know, every single time we've taken buses, like to Washington, D.C., the main purpose, the purpose of the bus ride was to go to Washington, D.C. and be at the march. But what really mattered to me was what happened on the buses. A, that the buses were diverse. B, that they were affordable. And C, that we had people on the buses speaking about local issues. And So that was what the work was for those buses. And so we had like 220 people go on that. And from that, people make connections and, learn and stay in touch with people and get involved in other activities. One of the other things that I've been doing for ages is publicizing Black businesses, because almost no white people know anything about Black businesses, and they need to be known more. They need to be part of the business community. We need to go to them, and we need to buy from them, and we need to tell our friends about them. So that's another thing I've done. We've done rallies for minimum wage. We covered events promoting public financing of elections, which would help people who aren't, very wealthy actually participate and run for office. I've publicized street namings in the Black community so that people get to know who are the historic figures in Evanston. I help promote a picnic, the EFAM picnic, which is a picnic that's been going on for years in the Black community that I had never ever heard of. And Evanston Sings, which is a gospel concert that I had never heard of. And so we, let's see. So I believe that these events and activities like the ones I mentioned that are intentionally designed to bring regular people, not just activists and leaders, together can help in small but important ways to move people towards friendship and knowledge and reconciliation. And I really believe that people who do, if you can encourage people to participate, then they'll be more likely to think and be aware of and support racial justice initiatives. And I've learned a ton. I mean, I learned, one of the most embarrassing things I learned is that gun violence isn't about gun violence in and of itself. It's about all this, this inequity, about the opportunity gap, the school to prison pipeline, the health gap, the wealth gap, housing inequity and unemployment. And that it's because of systemic racism across all institutions, as well as everyday racism that we all perpetuate without meaning to. I've learned about Evanston's whole history. I've learned about how Evanston's history has been replicated around the country. I've learned about all the historic landmarks in Evanston that, as in the video people talked about, the fact that these institutions existed because Black people could not participate in white institutions. And that when integration came, which was basically, as I was taught, a one-way effort where Black kids were brought into white schools rather than both ways, it decimated the Black community and all those institutions. And it really started the unraveling of the Black community. And it's really, really tragic. So one of the other enormous aha moments I had, and then I'll stop and ask you what, if you have questions, is Melissa Blunt, whose husband is the printmaker. When we were in Leadership Evanston, she's a psychologist and she deals with trauma. And I interviewed her, and one of the things she said to me was, white supremacy is the problem in this country, and all white people are white supremacists. And I looked at her, my whole face fell. I was so angry with her, and I thought, I don't like this woman, and this is, what is she even talking about? I knew white supremacy, as I talked about before, from the ADL with a capital W and a capital S. I have all these eye-opening moments that I grab onto and go with. I've learned things like the difference between equality and equity, diversity versus inclusion. I've learned about the invisibility of Jews of color in our own community, and amplifying voices versus passing the microphone to other people. I've learned about intent versus impact, that it's how your act and your voice comes out to other people that matters, not what you intended. I've learned a lot about call-out culture and cancel culture, some of which has been directed to me. This work is not easy. It's hard. I've wanted to give it up often. I have learned about how hard it is to be Jewish in the racial justice arena, and how you have to learn about working with coalitions and even, you know, sort of working towards a common goal, even though you may disagree quite a lot with people in other places. And I've learned a lot about my own boundaries and my own truth, and about how to try to maintain optimism. As Brian Stevenson says, you have to maintain optimism. I've learned over time, over these last 5 years, it's quite hard to maintain optimism. The deeper you delve into an issue and the more complicated it becomes, and the more complicated your relationships with people become. But I do believe that, as Martin Luther King said, if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. So, you know, everything has changed so much in the last year in terms of racial justice. Obviously Trump behind all of it, and then the police murders of George Floyd and others, and COVID has just blown open the issue of race in America, and it's made things very hard. And it's made it hard actually to be a white person working on racial issues as well. So, you know, there's a whole lot to renegotiate and navigate and find your place in, and sort of stay in your lane, but still be an ally. And these are all really, they're full of contradictions and difficulties, these words. So I'm going to stop now, and I do have suggestions for ways that people in the rabbinate can get involved in this kind of thing, but I talk very long, so I'm just wondering if you guys have questions or comments, and then I can share with you some suggestions and recommendations. So thank you for listening. I hope that wasn't too long.
I think several of us had questions regarding this whole process of reparations. What does that mean? Is that talking about reparations to individuals, or to the community, or to institutions, or what? How does that work?
So how does it work? And who, Nina, I'll just say in the chat, it was asked, who is targeted to receive reparations? What criterion are used? Can you speak a little bit more about the specifics of it?
So I can tell you a little bit. What I will tell you is that on March the 23rd, I'm actually having an event with Dino Robinson and Robin Simmons, hopefully, to talk about reparations to Evanston, you know. So you are all invited to that, and I'll send you information. Reparations in Evanston, it's the first governmental reparations initiative that's been passed and funded. It's funded through the sale of cannabis, recreational cannabis. And the reason for that is because of the injustices. You know, how many African Americans have gone to jail for cannabis use. And so it was a very fitting way to get, Evanston gets 3% of all sales from taxes on cannabis to the reparations fund, the municipal fund. There's also a separate fund that's held by the Evanston Community Foundation, and that's overseen by a group of Black leaders and residents that will work on a variety of different things, and that individuals can donate to. So reparations for Evanston, the first thing that they're looking at is home ownership and issues around housing and economic development. So that's where the money from the weed sales will go to. The money that's in the that's in the fund held by the Evanston Community Foundation will be at the discretion of the community with the overseeing. It's called the Reparations Stakeholders Authority of Evanston. And they will work out how, you know, what other things to focus on: schools, you know, individual payouts, all businesses, all, you know, things like that. So it's not a personal reparations. It's not cash given to individuals. And there's a ton of discussion in the Black community about how reparations is rolling out. There are a lot of people who don't agree with the way it's rolling out. They want cash, cash in hand. There are people who believe that only descendants of people who were enslaved should get them, and not all Black people. And then, there's the distinction between legacy Evanstonians and other Black Evanstonians. So there's a ton to work out, but the fact that it exists and is funded is an unbelievable thing for Evanston. And basically Robin Simmons consults with cities all over the country now. And now I think there are maybe 8 cities that have passed resolutions. And right now, nationally, HR 40, the National Reparations Bill, has just been reintroduced. And I think as we are speaking, they are discussing it in Congress. So it's very exciting. I think it's very complicated. I don't think it's going to be without, a lot of issues. But for us in the white community and in the Jewish community, I believe that our job is to, the job of the Black community is to figure out how they're going to manage it and what they want it to be. And our community is to support it and them, particularly financially, and also in getting involved and participating and learning more about the Black community. So I hope that was a bit helpful.
Also, Nina, on Thursday night, some of the leaders in the Black community are putting on a program for Evanston about reparations. Michael Neighbors will be participating in. Yeah,
I did not know
this. This tomorrow night.
Who? Okay, that's very interesting. I was totally unaware of that.
Right. I think it's at 7 or 7:30.
Okay.
Other questions for Nina?
Yeah, I have a quick question. Nina, you at the very end, you made a comment and passed over very quickly about how you've had some pushback because of your whiteness and Jewishness. Could you talk about that a little bit more? What it's been and how you've dealt with it? And
yeah, thank you for that question. I actually told Rennie a little bit about it, and Andrea knows about a lot of it as well. It's it's happened in a variety of different ways. At the very beginning of Dear Evanston, it is just me, and I became a nonprofit just so that I could raise money and help people get tax breaks for these things that I'm doing. I don't even make a salary at all and never have. And, there was another woman in Evanston she had started after me. She's a Black woman and she does a TV thing. And she was very angry that I was doing this and told people that I was sort of like the Jews in Hollywood, that I was running the media, things like that. And she's a well-respected, people follow her. No one, I don't, at the time I was so shocked. I'd experienced anti-Semitism from like Louis Farrakhan when I worked at the ADL, but I didn't think it would happen to me here. And I've also learned that there are a lot of African Americans in Evanston and everywhere that really respect and admire Louis Farrakhan, and you kind of have to work around that. So there was that, and then more recently, especially during Donald Trump, I think that the rhetoric about race and immigrants and Jews and all this hate, I think really pushed people to become very angry. And it was complicated by social media and the discourse on social media. And a group started in Evanston that on Facebook that was supposed to really focus. It was a Black founded group, and it was supposed to be for people to talk about racism in Evanston, particularly as it pertained to themselves. And over time, it's become very, very toxic. And there was anti-Semitism in that group where people would, say, oh, Jews ran the slave trade. And if I would question it or challenge that, I was told to shut my white mouth. No one knows that you're Jewish until you tell them. Things like that. Basically, this idea of the oppression Olympics, that we all have this different pain, but we're not talking about your pain here. We're talking about our pain. And it's so complicated. And then more recently, I had my whole page shut down for reasons that were really not legitimate. I think people who don't want a white person to, be as visible, or I think people think that maybe I'm too visible. So it's been really hard lately. It didn't start off that way. It definitely has tempered my optimism and, has made me quite nervous about sort of being out there in front. And so I've that's why I think it's going to be better to do, to focus on reparations in the white community. So it's been, I challenge it personally, but I have never challenged it publicly. I've never responded to all the charges against me publicly because I think that it's a losing battle. I think that the time at the moment is just not right to defend yourself as a white person. So it's hard. It's been hard.
Can I just add one little piece to that? I think that's really important, though, about Nina, is that Nina has the respect of all of the most respected leaders in the Black community. And just like every community has its diversity, so does the Black community. And when it comes to the respected leaders of the community, Nina has the respect of every single one of them. So she's had to deal with the underbelly and some of these difficult issues, but to know that the respected part of the Black community has really come out in support of her and has also condemned anti-Semitism.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I have to say that Rabbi London, because of her relationship with Pastor Neighbors and Pastor Ruin, we had Beth Emmett and had the interfaith community had this incredible program about anti-Semitism, and Pastor Neighbors led it, and I think it was even his idea. And so, that's an amazing thing. And yes, I think it's true that a lot of mine is, it's the activist community in Evanston, and very particular part of the activist community. And I'm by far not the only person who's been in their line of fire. So we all commiserate behind the scenes. It's tough.
I have a few comments and also a question. So I appreciate you sharing your challenges of navigating the Black community as a white Jewish woman. I work with older adults in the community, as in like people in their 80s and 90s predominantly, and they often see this as very separate from themselves. So if people have congregants who are kind of not really understanding how they are considered white, because a lot of my folks don't, Skin in the Game by Eric Ward is a really useful article to understand how Judaism, anti-Semitism is like the foundation of white nationalism, even if predominantly Blacks are targeted. And also I highly recommend, I'm almost done listening to it, I've been spending most of the pandemic listening to anti-racist literature, is Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by Beverly Daniel Tatum. I recommend the 20th anniversary edition because it is updated to include social media and Trump and other things and the Obama years. So I live in the 9th Ward in Evanston, and I had a very interesting conversation with my almost 9-year-old who goes to Oakton Elementary, which is of course led by a phenomenal, educated Black man who's a phenomenal leader.
Amazing.
For Dr. Allen. And of course, that's where Evanston houses their African-centered curriculum magnet program, which she's part of the Gen Ed program there, but still. And she said something to my husband and I that was like, well, I think it was around Martin Luther King Day, like, well, this is all like in the past, like none of it exists anymore. And we were like,
totally.
That's not true. So I guess like in your work, I'm curious how young you include people. And, it's sort of like I almost feel like it's almost like the debate of like, oh my God, when do we tell our child about the Holocaust and like how her great grandparents were refugees who were barred from entering the United States and ended up in, Central America. And that's why her grandmother is a Mexican citizen and like, like all of this stuff. So it's like, how do you, and that's all because of Nazi Germany. So it's like, and, Nazi Europe. So it's like, these are really traumatic, scary things for children. And in her child's eyes, she's like, well, it's all okay. Like our neighbors are, are white and have a Black adopted child, like it's all just like super normative.
Normal, right?
It's like living in the Ninth Ward, it's like very normal.
Totally, and I think that my experience was very different because we didn't choose to live in the Ninth Ward. I mean, if I had to do it over, I would never live where we chose to live because it was a very warped view of Evanston. But of course, we didn't choose to live in the Ninth Ward because of, we didn't say, oh, we're not going to live in the Ninth Ward, but this was where we were comfortable. Evanston doesn't do things with little kids, but there are lots of, I think that it's not a thing where you have to wait until your kid is a certain age. I think talking about racism has to be talked about from the minute they're born. Sharing books with Black characters written by, children's books with Black characters. There's an amazing organization called Young Black and Lit. Mm-hmm. And, I think that there are, and I'd have to find them for you, but I think there are quite a lot of, some of the people in this anti-racism group, they started off doing these anti-racist play dates, which were fantastic. So I think there are opportunities for kids, but I think as a parent, you have to bring in things that aren't from your lens, so that they can look through a window rather than look at themselves in a mirror. So seek out books and movies and things like that, podcasts for kids, for yourself. You should make sure your podcast list, your movie list are all very integrated, and that you have all different kinds, and then I think that you role model it for your kids, but reading books with people who don't look like you, I think for kids is huge.
Just one more book recommendation in terms of children's books, if maybe people need this in their synagogue libraries or whatever, is The Day You Begin by Jacqueline Woodson. It's just about sharing stories and diversity, and that's exactly what your film was like, people sharing their stories, but it's relevant for Jews, it's relevant for every culture, that we listen and hear each other's stories, but it's focused on children, and it's a favorite in my house. So I just wanted to share that it's a wonderful book if you don't have it in your community.
Well, and I appreciate that. I think that's really true, because we started out telling stories, and after a while, I remember thinking, I can't just keep telling stories, or what I'd rather say is sharing stories, because people are telling the stories, I'm just sharing them. And I thought, I can't just share these people's stories. That's sort of what motivated me to act more. But I honestly believe that sharing stories is activism in and of itself. And, I'm a frustrated journalist. I wish I had gone to journalism school. And I often think to myself, in a way, that is maybe where I'm the most comfortable, and it's a place that even though you need to stay uncomfortable, but I'm good at sharing stories and talking to people, and sharing those stories. People learn a lot, and you can go and look, if you go on my Dear Evanston page, dearevanston.org, my website. It's not a very well organized website, but you can read a bunch of stories, especially the further down you scroll, the more you'll see the stories, because I haven't done them that much. And also on my Facebook page, but stories are huge.
Nina, you said that Rivka, do you have a question? And then Nina, you said you had some suggestions for us.
Yeah, I have to go, but I wanted to say that what we're doing, I had read an article about something called IRA, which is individual reparation accounts. And what we do, we set up an account in our family, and we make everybody in the family, all the kids, everybody deposit money into it. Then after several months, we will donate to either some kind of Black issue or group or book. And even though it seems minimal, but it takes it home rather than leaving it to society. And, you know, I want to make sure that my kids have to be reminded every month to put money into this account. You know, we can easily write a check, but, you know, it's more about everybody being involved in this. And I was reading about the background of this, and it's very interesting because all of us have benefited from our mortgages and our homes and our college tuition and everything else on the backs of other people who didn't get this stuff. And so the person who started this concept wrote about how they wanted their kids to know that, you know, their privilege is based on a lot of other people not being privileged. So I can't get my kids to donate yet, but I'm trying.
Well, I think that's a great idea. And I think, you know, I always say to people, my goal is to get people to contribute to the fund, particularly the one that's going to be overseen by the Black community. But reparations is additive. So I feel like everybody should be giving to the fund because we are the first city and we want it to be a success, and it's going to be overseen by the Black community. So I want people to give to that, but I always say that doesn't mean you don't give to the NAACP or to an individual reparations fund or organization that you choose, and that you still go to their gala or their event. Reparations is always above all of that as well.
So this is something where my kids have to be involved. They have to give money to know that they're out of their salary. That's going to go, and we'll give to the Evanston Fund. I'm happy to do it.
It's a great idea.
Anyway, very inspiring. Thank you.
I think it's great. Anything else?
Can I just want to add something. You're talking about the power of stories. For about 30 years, I was a rabbi in a community in New Jersey, which was constantly patting itself on the back because it was the first town, I think, in the country to voluntarily integrate itself with the schools, and talked about its great race relations. And then there was a Black teenager who was killed by a cop, and there were riots that broke out. And our clergy council organized a bunch of conversations conversation groups between Black and white members of the community. And it was really an eye-opening experience for most of us in the community who were just completely unaware of how these middle-class Blacks, when they walked into a store, were followed around and that kind of thing. Right. And the difficulties that they had just living in this town that was constantly saying, oh, we're just the greatest place to live. We have Black and white people, and we all get along. And it really shook up the town and caused some changes.
That's fascinating. I mean, that's Evanston too. We all walk around patting ourselves on the back all the time because we've got such a diverse, fantastic community, and we don't see. I mean, that's a great story. Yeah. You know, one of the things that I think also, and that I honestly have only really learned, and this is something that as rabbis, I think is so important, is actually starting, and I think I mentioned it earlier, at home. And I mean, the idea that there are so many Jews of color and Jewish, Black people who are Jewish. And that was not something in my consciousness until really recently. I mean, I knew the odd one or two, but I also didn't know about their experiences in the Jewish community, coming to synagogue or participating and being asked if they're the janitor or if they're the cook, or all the security that shuls have, and a Black congregant walks in and they're asked what they're doing there. I mean, those are all really shocking things to me and very new. Like in all my work with Dear Evanston, this Jews of color is probably the most recent aha moment that I've had. And that was quite surprising to me. And I know there's an organization, there's a woman named Ilana Kaufman. Any of you know her? She has an organization called the Jews of Color Initiative. And then there's another organization called Kol Lashon that also works with diversity in Judaism. And of course, there's Rabbi Kapus Funay. And there's an amazing woman named Tamar Manasseh who is on the south side of Chicago. She founded an organization called Mothers Against Senseless Killing. And she, I think, just was ordained as a rabbi. She's amazing, amazing, amazing person. And so I feel like we're enriched as well. Just, I, as a kid, I was totally prejudiced as a Jew, like, to me, Jews were all white. I just had no idea. And so I think it's important, like, to, make connections for synagogues to make connections with Black churches and Black institutions so that you can partner on things for joyful occasions, and also when you can support each other against hate. I think it's really powerful when somebody, a group different than your own can come and support you in a difficult moment, and when you can do the same. So, connecting with Black churches, the NAACP, having a Black Lives Matter sign in front of your synagogue is so, a lot of churches have them. I don't know if that many synagogues have them. I think it's a great idea to do a racial equity task force. And there are some, I think, Andrea, we don't have a racial equity task force. We have a social justice task force.
No, we do.
We do.
That's both looking at working, and we have over many years, really worked outside of the community. And now we also are working really with Jews of color within the community as well.
Yeah. And I think if you have a synagogue that hasn't been doing that stuff, there are synagogues like Beth Emek, JRC, who, who do that and can help. And, start racial justice book groups in your congregation, and talk about racial justice and ideas that you've learned from podcasts that you listen to, and share those with the congregation. Be aware. One of the things that I know that Andrea does a lot is she's aware of cities' actions and resolutions and decisions and budgets, and she's always out there with a sign, that the budget is a moral document, or at a rally, participate, get your congregation to participate, and recognize as white Jewish people our privilege, and use it, and realize how we got it, how we blended in, because often I also don't think of myself as white. I think of myself as Jewish, but we're white because we have, like Irish people and Italian people, we've become white over time. And I highly recommend reading Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, which talks about how people became white and the caste system in America. Be willing to examine your own biases, bring in racial justice trainers. I have thoughts about racial justice training, but especially these days, I'm not so sure that they are so useful, but there are ways of doing it that I think are good. Be willing to engage with people you may not agree with, whether it's about Israel or about race or whatever it is. Just be willing. It is so hard for me still. I cringe, I get angry, I get really defensive. It is something I have got to learn, and it's something we all have to learn, because I think we can find commonalities. You know, I don't really subscribe to the, oh, you know, we're all, if you really think about it, we're all the same. I don't think we're all the same. I think we're all, many of us are similar, but a lot of us are different, and we have to figure out how to communicate through those differences and find things that we have in common, despite our differences. And I also think it's really important to interrupt racism, whether it's a letter to the editor when something happens in your community. We just had something happening in our community with an alderman who said quite racist stuff. If you want me to tell you more about that, I will. But, you know, find opportunities as a religious leader to write letters to the editor about racial issues. And
I think, Nina, Margaret just wanted to jump in with a comment.
Yes,
and then we'll give Nina the last word. Go ahead, Margaret.
Did I unmute?
Yeah.
This is all very fascinating. I actually grew up in Evanston, went to Oakton Elementary, but I'm 30 miles west of you in Elgin, where we do have book groups and things that run through the Gail Borden Public Library, of which I am coordinating two books at the moment. I don't even remember what they are. I also serve as a police chaplain, and there was a police shooting of a young African-American woman on Route 90 3 years ago. And so now I serve on since before Ferguson, right? I'm not new to this stuff at all. A very small task force at the police station of clergy and the command staff that has turned into a book group. So we read White Fragility.
That's amazing.
We read The Sunflower on Forgiveness, you know, and we read On Killing, which is about why people kill. That was difficult, written by an Israeli.
Wow.
And we had a mac and cheese cook-off, which, by the way, if any of you wind up in this position, Wacky Mac will not win. Just saying. But it does build community in having that cook-off, right?
Yeah.
I was pleased to lose that battle. But I entered in good faith. The problem, though, while the town is committed to this stuff, my congregation is not. Why is it a Jewish issue?
Wow.
And so on Sunday, I found myself doing a deep dive into critical race theory. I really do have a full-time job as a congregational rabbi, but Sunday afternoon, I was doing critical race theory with a congregant who said, it's all a bunch of crap. Well, that's not quite what he said. That's the cleaned up version. So at some point, I would love to think about maybe you would want to even come out the 30 miles. It's straight down Gulf Road with all of its turns.
That's so interesting. I think, first of all, the work that you do, that the police department is doing, and that's with you, that you're doing it?
Not solely, no.
But that's
amazing. But I understand what you're saying about, you know, what it's like to be a white woman, because now we have this we now have this new Black, dare I say, angry PhD, which I don't have one, woman who's the lead pastor at an all-white United Methodist church, but she's Black. And, you know, I can no longer get a word in edgewise, which is okay, but I'm also not quite sure why I'm sitting there anymore.
Well, I think that's a really big question, and it's a question I think all of us have to ask ourselves. And that's what I was saying earlier about, you know, the idea of amplifying Black voices versus passing the microphone. And and I think about it a lot. That
shows up in White Fragility. I don't want to hijack this because I actually have to figure out Purim stuff too, but.
Right. And maybe, you know, there's sort of like this idea of maybe it's time to pass the microphone to her, and it's hard to lose your, your place, or you take a smaller role.
I'm okay taking that smaller role. That's fine. I think that part of what I offer is a bridge between, we have a white woman police chief. So I think I'm that bridge. I can translate.
I would be happy to talk to you, and
I'd love to talk to you more.
And I can connect you to other people who are, even more sort of aware of these things.
Well, we tried to bring the ADL into something because we got stickered with some white supremacy stickers. And, sometimes when you're out here, there's this attitude of, well, we can do it all ourselves. Just saying. But you and I can take this offline at some point.
Yeah, that's fine. I can share. Do you want to put my email in the chat?
Sure.
Okay. Let's see.
I also know that we're going to continue this conversation as part of Chicago Board of Rabbis. We've, a task force so that we can continue to talk about these different issues and how we navigate, how we develop relationships, how we continue this work. And certainly one of the things that I have learned is that if you want to fight anti-Semitism, doing it with leaders of the Black community is the most powerful way. So that's not a zero-sum game when you're working at issues of hatred.
Yeah.
Nina, thank you so much. Thank you for being with us today. Nina, dearevanston@gmail.com if you want to be in touch with Nina. And this, except for the first 5 minutes, this was recorded. I hope that's okay with you, Nina.
That's
just
fine.
to share with other rabbis, not to share on YouTube for everyone to see.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. So thank you for your suggestions, for your honesty, and for sharing your journey with us. And in the name of my great teacher, Zichrono Livracha Ben Hollander, I'll say to be continued, which is what he always said. This is a conversation for sure to be continued, and we hope everyone here will be a part of it. So,
Thank
Nina,
you so much for listening.
I just want to tell you how much we support what you're doing and look forward to being involved in the future.
Thank you. Thanks,
Nina.
for inviting me so much.
So glad to have you here.
Bye.
Thank you, Nina.
Thank you.